Good morning, friends, and happy Palm Sunday to you. I hope you are well this morning. I hope that you are remembering that this is a day of celebration, of anticipation, of great joy. The Israelites were gathered at the gates of Jerusalem and anticipating their one true king, anticipating the Messiah. And they didn't have banners to make or balloons to gather, and so they grabbed palm branches, the branches off the nearest trees, and they were waving them joyfully in the air as they were welcoming Jesus into the gates of Jerusalem. You can see our Cedar Creek palm branches right back there. I hope you find ways to anticipate Easter coming, to celebrate the days of Holy Week this week, and to spend a little bit of time in the Palm Sunday story. You can find it in Matthew 21, Mark 11, Luke 19, or John 12. And if you have time today, many of you do, you might do a cross read and compare the four. They're all just a little bit different, and they all speak to the tone of each of the Gospels. The Mark passage is a little bit more sparse, Matthew a little bit more rich and full, Luke a little bit more personal. So enjoy, spend some time in those passages. We dug into them in the Chronicles on Tuesday. Hopefully you received that in your inbox. And I just want to share that for me in these days, mornings often are the most difficult. I don't know about the rest of you, but I wake up and I realize I'm learning so much about myself. I hope you are as well. But I wake up normally excited for the day, sometimes anxious about things that need to be happening, whatever it might be. And these days I wake up and it's a little bit like a not great dream. And I think, oh, still going. All right, what today? And there's plenty to do. I am blessed to still be working, so there are things to be done and to accomplish, but I'm also an extrovert and I am fed by engagement with other people and things to do, to be outside. And sometimes it's hard to refill your tank when you're not able to tap into those things that you know serve you well. I'm blessed to live in a home with lots of people, so I can interact with people, but there's something about looking forward to something in your day that gets you out of the ordinary. And that's hard to come by these days. Every day, every time I go to my closet these days, I'm passing by a picture of my grandfather. My grandfather fought in one of those rare generations who actually fought in World War II and was called up again in the Korean War. He died in 1969 of a heart attack in his sleep. Apparently, one of the last things he did, according to family story, is go to visit me. I was brand new newborn in the hospital, and then he went home and took a nap and didn't wake up. He had a heart attack in his sleep. The picture that I pass by every time I go to my closet these days, and I've had this picture for decades, but it just so happens to be with our construction around the house, things are getting bumped to different places, and it's sitting by my closet, so I see it many times a day. He's somewhere in the South Pacific, and he's standing by a Jeep, well, Jeep Wrangler is what we call it now, but it's an Army-issued Jeep with no top on it. He doesn't have a shirt on, and he's not smiling. It doesn't look miserable, but just kind of looks smug. Here we are. This is what it is. You know what I'm reminded of when I see that picture that I've had for so many years is that if he were trying to count the days, or even remember what day it was, or anticipate when the war might be ending, he and all of those around him, they would have made themselves crazy. They were just living day by day under far more pressure than we are, far more egregious circumstances, and it just gives me the perspective I need. That, yeah, I can't always find eggs in the store or whatever it is that I need, and I'm so spoiled and so used to getting things instantly, but maybe that's okay. Or maybe it's okay that yesterday we had a couple kids who realized it was Friday, but they thought it was Tuesday, and we're just aren't really sure which way is up these days. And maybe that's okay. Maybe there are times in history when we are called as a world to pause. This is not necessarily a new thing. It is a new thing, this virus, but it's not a new thing to have everything be called on pause. We're communicating about it in whole new ways right now, and that's fascinating. And it's so interesting to seek out metaphors and seek out stories when you're right in the heart of it and you don't necessarily know where the end is going to come. But I just want to encourage you to seek perspective if you feel that wait that I was describing that I sometimes do in the morning to find whatever places work for you that bring the broader perspective of the good that can come and can come in the moment and in the day ahead of you. We're going to look today again to a letter to exiles because the Old Testament is rife with them. And I think there's so much meaning for where we are right now, whether or not we're in physical exile. Some of us may feel like that. Is it so much as the Israelites? No, probably not. But certainly psychologically, it can feel like exile. And there are ways that the Lord calls us to not live in that place psychologically. So Jeremiah 29 is one of those chapters that you see on mugs, you see on picture frames, you see on t-shirts, often for graduates, for sometimes people who are getting married, people who are moving into a next new phase of life. There's a chapter that is often, or a verse that I'm sure you're familiar with that's often quoted, and we are going to read that verse, but it's actually a couple verses that come after it that I think speak most deeply into our current situation. But let's read through it. So I am in Jeremiah 29, and we're going to read verses 4 through 14. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in numbers there, do not decrease. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Yes, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Do not let the prophets and diviners among you deceive you. Do not listen to the dreams you encourage them to have. They are prophesying lies to you in my name. I have not sent them, declares the Lord. This is what the Lord says. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place. Here's the verse that's so familiar. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Listen here. Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your hearts. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and places where I have banished you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back to the place from which I carried you into exile. We have in our Western culture such a sense that waiting on something can be wasting time. Waiting in itself, I think, has a completely different meaning as a verb in our culture as it did in Old Testament culture or even New Testament culture in Jesus' time. So I want to press you to maybe think beyond what that word even means, because to us it means what? Waiting at the DMV, waiting in the grocery store line, maybe before the current month, whatever that might look like, but even waiting in the grocery store line 3 months ago, waiting in traffic. It usually brings up discomfort and anxiety and wanting to get going faster because we have someplace that we have to do, something that we have to accomplish. And that's, for me, where my grandfather's picture has been so helpful, because we think of the things that we have canceled off our calendar and the things that we have had to miss. And I do ache for those who have had to set aside a wedding or a funeral or some of these graduations, some of these things that are such landmark either celebrations or times to come together and be human together. And those have had to be pushed aside, and I'm so sad for that. But when I think of my grandfather's picture, and I think of the fact that he wasn't in that moment probably thinking about, when am I going to get back to my studies? When am I going to get back to my wife? When am I going to continue having a family and a job? Certainly he had moments of that, but to sit and wait and be constantly in that place of thinking of here rather than the present moment could eat you alive. And for some of those men and women, it did. When they came back, when my grandfather came back, he drank too much. He was an alcoholic up until the last few years of his life. He found AA and was able to recover, but oh, it's a heavy weight. And he ended up with two daughters, my mom and her sister, born just a year apart, and then no kids for about a decade, and then two sons born because of the wars in between. So, in that, I suppose in our anxiety filled and let's go and fill our calendar sense of a culture, we would say that that's the kind of waiting we don't want to do because we want our plan. But there is so much richness in the Lord's plan. And sometimes our plan, as we hear in this verse, is certainly not what the Lord had in mind for us all along. And when we battle that and when we force our plan over His, it will never turn out the way that we hope that it will. And so in the waiting, and I'm having a hard time with that word, I feel like we need a whole new word. In the space between what we thought was here and we thought was going to be here, what can this space be? Rather than just thinking, when is this going to be postponed until? When will this be replaced? When do I get back to? And these two come back together, because sometimes they never do. And God intended that. God intended my grandfather's life to be what it was because it not only impacted him and made him a richer, fuller, more empathetic, deeper person, but it impacted generations past him. That's the kind of God vision that we struggle to have when we're just looking at the day in front of us. So in these days, when it can feel heavy because we are still walking up, if we're looking at the curve, we're probably still walking up the curve. It's difficult yet to see where the light might be. But we are called as a body, as Christians, to find out what that waiting is, what that space is, and to do just what these verses call us to. So I encourage you today to spend some time in Jeremiah 29 and read through these verses again. I just think they're absolutely beautiful, not just this idea that the Lord has plans for us, but listen again to what follows, particularly in 12 and 13 and 14. You will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all of your heart. I will be found by you. That's what should be on t-shirts. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and places where I have banished you, and will bring you back to the place from which I carried you into exile. So for the Israelites, it was very physical as well as emotional and psychological. And for us, to some extent, yes, it's physical, but it's very, very much psychological. Where are the places that you go because you have access in your homes to go anywhere in the world on the internet and TV and whatever it might be, but where are the places that you go and where are the places that the Lord calls you to come back to? He also calls us not to set aside the current place and just ignore it, waiting for our better time. In the verses above that, he says that we are called to seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you will prosper. So how will you pray today for your community, for your home, for whatever work you may have or those in your household may have, that they would prosper, and not just prosper in financial terms. We have our capitalist view of what prosper would be, but prosper in gracious, empathetic, grace-filled, merciful ways, that humanity would be able to be in touch with one another in ways that we have not seen for generations. We all have those moments in our lives or in history that we think, where were you when? Where were you in 9/11? Where were you in 1986 when the space shuttle exploded? Where were you? And I'll start to show my age, whatever the fill in the blank might be, when Princess Diana died. And in that, where were you? We get an instant connection with someone else, right? There's something that we have that we share in common and we can talk about. I know as a person of faith that if I am traveling, I'm on an airplane, I'm waiting in line, as I talked about before, if I'm meeting somebody new and there's language there that I can tell that they are a Christian, if they talk about feeling blessed or they overtly talk about their faith in God, there's a connection. We have a common ground. We are brothers and sisters in Christ, and I can speak with them. I'm going to bring those two together. The moment in time is that first connector. And forevermore, spring 2020 or coronavirus 19 or whatever it goes down in history as that we are living in right now will be a common connector for everyone who is alive right now. Where were you when? What was your experience? How did you handle it? What were the stories that you witnessed around you? Okay, that's the sort of secular connector. And now let's remember the Christian connector. We, as people of Christ, will have an instant connection with the whole world for having lived through this. It should be that gone are the days of there's this space between us that we can't cross. We can all cross it because we have lived through this. So as we emerge, what are the open doors that we will see as Christians that we can enter in and talk about the peace and light and hope and joy of Jesus Christ that others may not have experienced or not yet know about? We will have an open door that we have not yet had in our lifetimes. And it will be that common moment of waiting, of persevering, of giving up, of loss, job loss, physical loss, loss of life in families, whatever it might be. And that, church, will be our moment to enter in. And we don't need to wait for that moment. That moment is here. And I hope you're finding ways to connect. Just at 7 o'clock last night, our neighbors, and we're down a flag lot drive, so we actually can't see our neighbors, but everybody came out at 7 o'clock and they were singing. And so Carson pulled out his bugle and was bugling on the front porch, and we could hear laughter up over the neighbor's house. Those are the connections that start a lifetime of conversation and open doors and ways to share the gospel that we have never seen. So I hope that you will enter in. We all have to start here. I have to start here. And my mornings that maybe wake up, oh, and then I think, oh, and it feels like a weight. That's my weight. And I need to step into Jeremiah 29, step into God's promises, recognize that weight and move beyond and anticipate Easter next Sunday and walk through the holy days of this week mindfully. That is mine to own. What is yours? What is it that you need to step into so that your heart is as close to the Lord as it can possibly be? Because what did we complain about 3-4 months ago but a lack of time, a lack of space? And we have been given that. So start there, your relationship with the Lord. What do you need to do? How do you need to come on your knees? How do you need to carve space, whether your house is crowded or not crowded? How do you need to just come before the Lord and listen? And from there, how do you speak into this place that we have been exiled to? Because we're called to. It says in these verses that we're called to prosper. We're called to bring peace. We're called to pray over it. So number one, get yourself right with the Lord. Get yourself in a place where you don't feel any shame. You don't feel guilt for not doing X, Y, Z that you're supposed to do in the Christian life, but that the Lord has said, I forgive you, sister. I forgive you, brother. And let's move forward together. And then from there, what will your role be in this place that we all are together in this moment in time on Palm Sunday? Blessings, my friends. Do not be strangers to me or to one another. Feel free to pick up a phone, send an email. Let us know how you are. We do love you. We pray for you. And I hope that you are well on this beautiful Palm Sunday. God bless.